You may have heard the terms anxiety attack and panic attack used interchangeably, but did you know that one of them isn't actually a term that's recognized and used by mental health professionals? Today we'll be looking at the symptoms of both anxiety and panic attacks, and we'll look at how you can tell the two apart. I'm Camilla, I'm a psychologist, and I'm on a mission to spread mental health awareness and make better mental well-being available to more people. In my daily work as a psychologist, I see people struggling with both anxiety and panic attacks. Both can be really debilitating and have big impacts on people's lives. What I also see is that there's often confusion about the terms. It is important to know the difference between anxiety and panic disorders because different treatments are needed depending on what you're struggling with. You may already have noticed that I'm not using the term anxiety attack. That's because anxiety attacks isn't actually an official clinical diagnosis or term that we as mental health professionals use. When we diagnose someone with a mental disorder or a mental difficulty, we often do it on the basis of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM for short. The version currently being used is the DSM-5, and this is published by the American Psychiatric Association. Now, in this diagnostic manual, you won't find anxiety attack as a diagnosis, but I still see a tendency that anxiety attacks as a term is creeping in more and more in social media content. This has the potential to cause some confusion, because you see, when there's no set definition of a term and no official diagnostic criteria, then it becomes very individualized what we understand from the term. So what one person understands when they say anxiety attack might be completely different to what someone else understands. It looks to me like the term anxiety attacks is generally being used to describe a build-up of anxiety, but I do also see that it's sometimes being used interchangeably with panic attacks, which is a diagnosable disorder. To get a better understanding of the two and to be able to tell them apart, I think we should look at the two separately. So let's first look at anxiety and then look at panic attacks afterwards. At its core, anxiety is just an emotion, just like happiness and anger. So as an emotion, it's a completely healthy and natural part of our emotional life. Now, like all emotions, anxiety can vary in its level of intensity. Now, the problem is that unlike with most other emotions, we don't have a wide variety of words available in English to describe the different levels of intensity of anxiety. Let's think of the emotion anger as an example of this. If we look at the range of different intensity levels of anger, we'll see different terms to describe each different level. It could be like this, where we've got mildly bothered at one end, and we've got severely rageful at the other end. Now, in contrast, with anxiety, we see that anxiety is a single word that's used to represent a broad range of emotional intensity. At the low end of the intensity range, anxiety is normal and adaptive, but at the high end of the intensity scale, anxiety can become pathological and maladaptive. So while everyone experiences the emotion anxiety, not everyone experiences the same frequency, intensity, and duration of anxiety as someone who struggles with anxiety disorder. What I do tend to see in our use of language, though, is that the term anxiety has become more pathological and less so a reflection of the natural emotion that anxiety can also be. But in this next section, we'll look at anxiety when it becomes problematic and pathological. We typically see that anxiety builds and intensifies over time. It's usually highly correlated with the excessive worrying about a potential danger, whether that danger be real or just perceived. The most common symptoms of anxiety can be divided into physical symptoms and mental symptoms. Let's start by looking at the physical symptoms. The physical symptoms include disturbed sleep, dizziness, fatigue, increased heart rate, an increased startle response, and muscle tensions. Now, if we look at the most common mental symptoms, they include excessive worrying, difficulties concentrating, increased irritability, and restlessness. Now, if anxiety and the anticipation of something builds up to a level where stress levels get so high that the symptoms feel overwhelming, this might actually feel like an attack. This might be one of the reasons why we hear people refer to anxiety attacks, because it feels just like that. Before we look at the characteristics of panic attacks, I have a quick favor to ask of you. If you're enjoying this video or taking any value from it, can you please give it a like for me? It'll help the video reach more people who may benefit from knowing the difference between anxiety and panic attacks, and that would really help me in my mission to spread mental health awareness. Thank you, and let's look at those panic attacks. A panic attack is an intense and sudden feeling of fear, terror, or discomfort accompanied by several other physical and mental symptoms. Unlike anxiety attacks, panic attacks do actually have a clear definition and clear diagnostic criteria. So again, we can break the symptoms down into physical and mental symptoms. According to the DSM-5, a panic attack is characterized by 4 or more of the following symptoms: chest pain, chills, excessive sweating or hot flashes, a feeling of choking, a feeling of dizziness or lightheadedness, heart palpitations, pounding heart or an accelerated heart rate, nausea and abdominal distress, numbness or a tingling sensation, trembling or shaking, and a sensation of shortness of breath or difficulties breathing. Now, if we look at the mental symptoms that can be associated with a panic attack, these include feelings of unreality. This is what we in psychology call derealization. A feeling of being detached from oneself. This is what we in psychology call a depersonalization. A fear of losing control or going crazy. And finally, a fear of dying. Panic attacks usually occur suddenly and can seem out of the blue. It can sometimes be difficult to initially see the obvious trigger in the situation. We do also see some cases where the panic attack is almost expected, as it's triggered by a known stressor, like a phobia. Panic attack symptoms usually peak within 10 minutes and then subside again. However, some attacks can last longer, and we do sometimes see that panic attacks can occur in succession of each other, so it can be difficult to tell when one attack ends and another begins. The symptoms of a panic attack are often so extreme that they can cause severe disruption. The intensity of the physical symptoms are often so severe that they can be mistaken for a heart attack, and they can lead to a very real fear of dying. Now, a panic attack can be a standalone attack, and actually 1 in 4 people will experience a panic attack at some point in their life. A panic attack is an extremely uncomfortable experience, but fortunately for most people, they'll only experience 1 or maybe 2 attacks during their lifetime. But if we do see reoccurring panic attacks over time, then we might have what we call a panic disorder. This is when we keep seeing unexpected reoccurring panic attacks, and we in between panic attacks have this fear of experiencing another panic attack. So if we look at anxiety and panic attacks side by side, we can see the differences and the similarities. There are some shared symptoms like shortness of breath and increased heart rate that can be seen in both anxiety and panic attacks. The main differentiating factor here is the severity of the symptoms. We'll typically see them present milder in anxiety and more intense in panic attacks. It's really important to note that the experience of both anxiety and panic attacks can vary from person to person, both in terms of the way we experience the symptoms, but also in terms of the triggers and underlying factors. So even though we often see this distinction that panic attacks often don't have an obvious trigger, and anxiety more likely does, this is by no means always the case. I commonly see clients who experience panic attacks and know exactly what the triggers are, just as I often see people suffering from anxiety and don't know what the triggers are at the start of therapy. But in both anxiety and panic attacks, therapy can often be helpful in identifying and working on the triggers. Through therapy, we can often identify the underlying thoughts and beliefs that are fueling the anxiety and that can potentially hold you in this cycle of reoccurring panic attacks. Now, both anxiety and panic attacks have the potential to be really disruptive to your everyday life. If you or a loved one struggle with either anxiety or panic attacks, know that help is available. Talking to your doctor about your symptoms is the first step towards relief. There are both medicinal and therapeutic treatment options available. There are also things you can do yourself to reduce anxiety and panic attacks. I will upload more videos about both anxiety and panic attacks, both how we can understand them and what we can do to deal with them. Make sure to subscribe to not miss out on those. Thank you for watching this one. Take care and bye for now.